Both of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Both of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Both of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Or we can get gully, I'll size up your body and put some white chalk around it.
Welcome to the Single Dads of the Midwest, episode 20. Almost single-handedly kept alive by our good mutual friend, Don/Sheldon. Today I have Mike on the program to talk about his fandom of Kanye and then how that got him into fashion and other things. And I'm just excited to tag along for the journey. So, Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mike or Al. I kind of go by two first names. A lot of non, I guess, Judeo-Christianly named people kind of go by two names in the States, if you know how it is. Maybe Don and Sheldon included, I think. And I'm just like a guy, I work in IT, and I'm a Kanye fan, and I think that's something interesting to talk about, I guess. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. And yeah, Kanye is definitely a very big figure when it comes to pop culture, which we were just talking about. So I guess maybe we could start with, what initially got you into Kanye and what kind of started that journey?
Sure. So I think everybody first hears Kanye on the radio at some point, right? Because, well, at least I guess people our age. I don't know if Zoomers like listen to the radio at all. They listen to playlists, and maybe they found Kanye on a playlist at some point.
Sure.
But in my day, as a millennial, you'd hear shit as a kid on the radio and be like, okay, whatever, this is catchy. Let me look this up when I go home, or when I have access to some computer and I can get into looking into this person's album because the single's so good. And I think I was part of the generation that didn't really listen to rap music or music at all as an important part of me growing up. Like my parents didn't have a record player or anything around the house, so it was never me growing up with what my parents listened to, which them being immigrants from Asia, we would just be foreign music that I would have no interest in it anyway. But just hearing stuff on the radio one day, you hear Gold Digger, which is just an undeniable hit, right?
Yeah.
It's that one single with Jamie Foxx doing a mock Ray Charles impersonation, which I'm not sure if many people know that's not actually Ray Charles. It's Jamie Foxx doing an impersonation of Ray Charles, because at one point Kanye saw that Jamie Foxx had won an Oscar for playing Ray Charles in a movie and went, that's close enough, right? Ray Charles had, I think, won a Grammy recently, a bunch of duets before he passed, and I think it was around the same time that the biopic was finally made with Jamie Foxx. But anyway, I've never seen the biopic, but the song itself is just great. It's high energy, it's funny, it's catchy, and that's the day I became a Kanye West fan. And when his next album, Graduation, came out, he became the biggest artist in the world, touring with U2 in stadiums across the world, right? Yeah, it was just a fun artist to be into. And it wasn't any big part of my life or anything until really around the time I got around to college, and I started listening to more rap music than just Kanye, right? When you get into 90s stuff, Wu-Tang Clan, that sort of golden age of hip hop, sort of stuff, right? And then My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy came out. Everybody enjoyed that. I enjoyed that, and that's when you become a Kanye fan for life. If you were just, a freshman in college during that period, I guarantee you were a Kanye fan for life because of all the cultural hubbub about him, right?
That was the peak, I would say, for sure.
Yeah, definitely of his, I think, people taking him seriously as an artist rather than just a personality or a celebrity. So what I wanted to talk about was not just gush about Kanye's career or whatever, but Kanye's coming out with a new album to date this around next week, if it does drop. Nowadays with Kanye, just because he announces something doesn't mean that it's true or it's going to happen.
Sure.
Any Kanye fan knows that. But I wanted to talk about how from a rap artist, you could kind of recreate an entire culture, right? Because the big thing about rap music for me is that it portrays more than I think any other genre of music, a whole not just necessarily a personal story, but because of the density of language usually given in rap verses versus like pop or something like rock, which is I think, at least in my experience, generally trends towards the more poetic than the very kind of, I think, inherently mundane, earthbound, worldly, aspirations of the writing in hip hop, at least the mainstream stuff and the stuff that I generally listen to. Because of that, you end up like not just creating like a persona, but you end up kind of world building as a hip hop artist, like this
Sure.
entire like feeling of where this persona or like personality that you've created kind of exists in. You like uh and then like the because of like the need to kind of reflect this kind of reality that you've created for your persona in the lyrics, you start acting more and more like the persona, and like buying these cars that you've said that now you've had, right? And the dreamer dreams the dream and then lives within the dream, to use a David Lynch quote.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of like why I find hip hop music so luxurious and like what's the word, immersing,
Hmm.
immersioning. I don't know what the actual word for that is.
Yeah.
Immersioning, is that a
I,
word?
I think I understand what you're trying to say. Yeah, there's just this sort of, like you said, I think perhaps the best phrase, or at least the phrase I identified it with, was like this world building and personification of these artists. I mean, you see that not just with Kanye, but you could say the same about Drake, Lil Wayne. I mean, it's like a kind of a recurring theme that happens. Even Tupac and Biggie had like this their unique personas um, in terms of the hip hop community. Um, so yeah, I think that definitely does make sense of this sort of earth or world building that does um, happen. And would you? And I guess another kind of a natural question after that is what kind of happens when the persona is in conflict with the actual person. I guess maybe you could talk to Kanye specifically, or maybe other artists.
Sure. I mean, like the persona specifically is, you know, you kind of hope that like with any artist, right, any musical artist, that as they like grow as a person, their music changes to reflect that, and then you slowly evolve towards something that isn't that hopefully it becomes more sustainable or more mature, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you eventually either become like what Kanye was for like a couple of albums at least, like a like, kind of like semi-retired dad, or you join a 27 club and you die of an opium overdose at some point, right? Like you just either go crazier or you crash down to earth a bit, and you start reflecting on like a more mature set of values. For instance, like I think one of the more celebrated albums that came out this year was the Tyler the Creator album, "Call
Mhm.
Me If You Get Lost," which a lot of music journalists celebrated because like it's so much of a departure from like his earliest stuff, which is like uh, you know, it was very clear with the third stuff what his influences were, like how he attempted to use like shocking like language to make a name for himself and like create a brand for himself. Like the difference between like, Yonkers and somebody who's talking about like, maybe I'll take a trip because I've been so stifled. I'll go to Switzerland and look at some lakes. I'll put a bike rack on my Rolls Royce, right? Like the idea of like somebody who's like whose idea of a breakout music video is to eat a cockroach and then eventually wanting to put a bike rack on a Royce, not a Ferrari, but like a Rolls Royce, like this very like kind of in love with the European and old world ideals of luxury, and like talking about like his own like regret at having a controversial persona on some of the tracks of the new album and such.
Mm.
People celebrate that, and then like you kind of have like also on the other hand a lot of uh or the new Vince Staples album, for instance, which also talks about like gangsta culture and the West Coast and stuff like that, and kind of like almost a a nostalgic look on like that lifestyle while like acknowledging its danger, right? So you eventually trend towards that way after you get past your third album, Pump.
But yeah, we're talking about the kind of maturity that sometimes happens with artists. Although I guess Kanye, the argument could definitely be made that the music has matured, with his last few albums. But there's sort of this interesting thing with the persona that's kind of all over the place. I mean, I guess that's more maybe specific to Kanye, especially with the whole kind of MAGA fandom, and then he's obviously since broken away and then ran for presidency. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
I mean, he's a regarding the MAGA thing. I think he's just a land owning billionaire with conservative values, and that's what that is, right? I don't think it's a joke that he was doing it. I think there was some talk on the internet that maybe it was some sort of like Andy Kaufman-esque performance art piece in an attempt to like trick Trump into like prison reform, which I don't think was a thing. I think that might have been on the table at some point with like the work that Kim Kardashian was doing, but like she's the non-crazy one of that relationship, and I think that kind of fell through as well. So I don't think it's that. I think straight up that like he's just like one of those Fox News watchers, right? I mean,
Sure.
it is what it is. It's always sad that somebody that whose work you admire turns out to uh, be conservative, I guess, versus having leftist values. But we're not the majority here.
Sure. Um, and so you mentioned like obviously getting into Kanye and the fan, becoming a fan for life, but that also leading to this exploration of other parts of culture. Do you want to talk about that? Because
Yeah.
obviously Kanye started his own brand, and so there's stuff beyond fashion. But I'm curious how your your fandom of Kanye's music kind of branched you out in other directions.
Yeah, so if you're a fan of Kanye's music, since around like I want to say the graduation era was the first time he was like, I'm going to start my own clothing brand. At that point, the clothing brand idea was like something very akin to Japanese streetwear. The brand was going to be called Pastel, and I think it gets a name drop in the Stronger. Like he shouts out that his clothing name's a brand name is going to be Pastel. So even back then, he had aspirations to that. He's always been into that. But what ends up happening is because he's just into it and the culture, he's like rapping about specific brands, he's rapping about specific models. And then at a certain point, he starts rapping about his inability to get a fashion line going. Right. I mean, he does get multiple fashion lines going, as in he like drops his own money to like basically buy at huge markups like fabrics and experienced personnel to basically work for him, instead of like using like the infrastructure of an actual fashion company, having somebody set that up for him. So he goes into like millions of dollars in debt trying to do this himself. He's getting incredibly frustrated and none of it's catching. And to be honest, none of it's good, right? He doesn't have the experience with staffing and kind of like the hiring process and finding the correct talent to get the stuff together. And I think that sort of changes when he like starts after the Yeezus era around 2013, 2014, like culminating, I think, in 2016, where he like really like gets in with Adidas. He gets his shit figured out with regards to manufacturing, designing, all that sort of stuff. And kind of following along with him on that process, right? I mean, it's the sort of like, I guess, this, you could kind of treat each like album Kanye comes out with as kind of like a season in a television show where he's like confiding in you like his feelings about doing all this stuff, sometimes metaphorically or sometimes literally calling people out by name in the fashion industry and being like, you were an asshole to me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you start looking up what these references are in like an attempt to understand the lyrics, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how you get introduced to like looking at these sort of things and like trying to figure out what he sees in this, right? And that ends up in you like kind of getting into some of these brands, because if you just look at this stuff, if you actually try to like understand runway fashion as like kind of an artistic expression versus like something that anybody would be able to wear day to day, Then it just becomes like another avenue of things to enjoy, just like movies, just like music, just like et cetera, right? And interestingly enough, because of like this like need in fashion to always keep things moving and hip and new, like it's a lot less repetitive too than what you might necessarily get in the movies or what have you. You see a lot uh newer things quicker. Of course, there's trends and everything, and every designer hops on the latest trend or whatever, so you start seeing the same things everywhere. But everybody gives their own spin on things because the one thing you don't want to get caught doing, especially in high-end runway fashion, is copying. There are entire like Instagram accounts that's whole deal is just like calling out like obscure 1998 shows that this new show like totally copied or so, and they'll drag you in the streets if you get caught copying something. So there is this like very strong emphasis on being as bold and as experimental as possible, right? And just same in rap music. For instance, I want to say in the mid 2000s, in the height of what they call the mixtape era, which was right on the cusp about like before streaming hit, where like rappers were not necessarily able to drop an album as often as they wanted to in order to like keep their name like in social media. They would just start releasing literal full-length 80-minute albums for free online, clearing none of the samples. Nobody got paid, but it would be basically marketing material to keep them keep them their name alive in like the playlists of the public, right? That era eventually died when streaming hit because people were like, oh, let's just clear the samples and then we can actually make money off these albums. So that mixtape era died. But during that mixtape era, it was everybody in a specific genre called trap music, which lyrically speaking was just it was all garbage. It's specifically southern rap music about dealing crack cocaine inside of abandoned houses, right? Like there's not much variation in terms of subject matter for trap music, but because there was so little like in the content itself, it was all about performance and ingenuity and experimentation. This is where we got the Migos. This is where we got Young Thug. This is where we got Future and all of them. And like and that propagation of the creativity of rap music, like is like what leads to specific hi-hat patterns now happening in country songs. Like it literally touched every avenue of music in the world. Nothing was safe from the grand evolutions of trap music in the years of 2009 to 2000. I want to say 16.
Yeah, everyone talks about 808s now, and that came, I think, in large part from its use in trap beats.
Well, I mean, 808s have been around in hip hop since the 90s, but like the specific kind of production, which was very flat and very electronic, it did not try to create a sound stage.
Yeah.
Like that sort of, it's silent anyway. But like specifically the point to not create like a soundstage or any sort of thing reflecting traditional plain music, but instead like this very electronically arranged music with these DAWs like Fruity Loops and what have you. That sort of like very industrial, like crank 'em out production style, plus like the very disposable lyrics that just you had to differentiate yourself in some way. So people became very innovative, and we're still feeling the after effects of that with new genres like post trap and hyper pop, kind of like exploding just right now on the scene. But yeah, like I was saying with okay, sorry.
Oh no worries. Who do you describe as post trap?
Post trap, for instance, is like I want to say the big beachhead of post trap was the work that Father and Awful Music was doing. Specifically, I want to say a highlight was the Futures, not Futures, Father's LP. I think Lil Diddy and I Love self-titled EP I Love McConan, which eventually got re-released by Drake. But it was worse because he just put features all over everything. It's not as good as an album as the original EP, which was just, again, a mixtape.
Yeah.
Right. And this was the very, very end of the mixtape era. But basically, post-trap as a genre are people who grew up listening to trap music, realizing this is the coolest shit in the world, and basically taking aesthetic, breakthroughs from trap music and like reapplying it to like stuff that wasn't specifically about trapping. It was not about dealing drugs. It was not about life in the streets. It was about whatever, and it just used the aesthetic, I guess, signifiers of trap to kind of cobble it together into like a totally new thing, right? You have like Isla McConan singing like Morrissey over like trap instrumentals, and talking figuratively about selling dope instead of actually selling dope. I mean, he was just like, I think professionally before he blew up, McConan was like a hairdresser. He never sold drugs and he wasn't around that shit. But he listened to the music because you can't, it's undeniable. Gucci Mane and T.I. and Jeezy and all of them, what they did was they really like kind of created a hotbed of innovation, like, fucking Paris in the fucking 20s, if you want to make a painting analogy.
Sure.
It was crazy in Atlanta. And then like hyper pop and stuff like Charlie XCX,
Sure,
and Sophie and all that. But like all that comes from trap and like what they did there.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, artists like to both take inspiration, for lack of a better word, from each other, but also try to differentiate in new ways. So, yeah, I feel like that you see those similar trend lines in other genres too, rock and roll and country, kind of this people growing up with a certain style and try to incorporate some parts of it while also adding their own. I think that's pretty much true across the board.
It's
in
the
most
history of
art.
all music in the United
Exactly.
States. It
Pretty much
starts as
history of
black
all art.
music and eventually becomes something else,
Exactly.
Techno music, house music, rock and roll, blues music, jazz music, all black music, regardless of like what genre it is. And so people move on to the next thing. But like to more specifically go on into fashion, we were talking about broadening out of music.
Yeah.
Like a big Kanye kind of analog, I guess, in the fashion world is I forget how to pronounce this guy's name. He's like Georgian, so he's got like it's like Dimna Gustava or something like that. But he's so associated with Kanye and like that, like people like who make T-shirts about like Kanye's kind of cadre of friends in fashion, basically who are now running fashion, like Matt Williams, who used to be Lady Gaga's like dress designer, but like started working for Kanye right after that. He's now working as the head of Givenchy. Kanye's former art director is the head of Louis Vuitton. Like a lot of people in his camp basically are heading these big European fashion houses now, or at least for LVMH. But like one of his friends, who he was one of the first to start like popularizing their silhouettes and stuff back when they were doing work as Vermont, where the Gustava brothers, Demna Gustava in particular, goes on to become head of Balenciaga, right? And like the kind of shape of Demna Gustava, who eventually gets hired as the guy who runs Balenciaga and kind of catapults it from a brand that was kind of like dying off as like a fashion brand that kind of has like a very rarefied air to it, and at that point was like starting to go the way of like Versace, and Versace, if in terms of like the kind of fighting weight, was kind of like coming out of the hype like heavyweight division and kind of like entering in sort of like a more of a middle of the mall value brand. So much so that I think recently they sold themselves to Michael Kors, which is like, Michael Kors is the great name in terms of middle of the mall soccer mom handbags, right? Like Versace's about getting there, right? It's no longer quite looked up to, as it were. But Balenciaga was heading in that direction, and like Dimna saved it and introduced a totally new silhouette and way of thinking about fashion, and introduced this thing called normcore. I don't know if you've heard of normcore.
I've not heard of it.
Okay, so the premise of normcore is that a bunch of like snarky people on the internet at one point invented this phrase to describe a way of dressing for people who were into fashion to look like on purpose as if they were not into fashion. Like specifically, I think a big style reference point for normcore is the 90s show Seinfeld. This is like dress as if you were a Seinfeld character.
Ah, I see. Yeah. There's a lot of, you still see that trend today with like streetwear and stuff, but like it's stuff that isn't supposed to necessarily look aesthetically necessarily pleasing. It's almost trying too hard to be casual.
exactly. But what Demna did was he kind of leaned into that as like an idea and specifically tried to recreate looks that he saw growing up in like 90s Eastern Europe.
Okay.
So like you look like a fucking barbecue, but like everything was slightly exaggerated. Everything was slightly too big or too boxy or too off. You look a little bit like a Disney villain, but it was edgy and cool, right? And that was very associated with Kanye and him both like came up together on like the boxy clothing trend and the shoe trend. And I think on his first collection, Kanye paid Demna to design a lot of his pieces, and I think set the tone for like how his most successful Yeezy brand kind of aesthetically goes for, kind of establishing the house codes for him. Now
And
I
do you
don't know if
think
that's true, but
and do
like
you
he definitely worked for him.
and do you think that is where Kanye got his success from following this model? Because it seems like he had these previous fashion failures, but then with Yeezy he got the success. Or is there some other
Yeah,
ingredient or
I feel like
ingredients
with
missing?
his previous high fashion line, he was kind of attempting to chase trends that were set by Oliver Roosting at Balmain, for instance, like a little bit too much. I feel like a lot of the silhouettes are too similar to stuff that was already out there. But because Demna had yet to graduate to the big leagues and like bring Balenciaga to like the top 5 brands in the world, it wasn't quite like 100% there yet, and there was enough originality and separation from the house codes of Vetremont and eventually Balenciaga that it was its own thing, even as it shared sort of similar DNA, right? And like it also had like enough of like an urban element to it versus like a European like snobbish. I don't know if snobbish is the right word. Like I'm not European. I've never been to Europe. I don't know how they dress out there, but I have friends who've lived in Paris and they're like, no, people dress like that normally. Not like that, but like they
Sure.
dress kind of like that. A more European look. And Kanye stays away from that, and he's more interested in like inspirations from genre film. Like people keep joking at him about shit looking like Lord of the Rings, looking like Star Wars, right? Well, he's actually looking at these things for inspiration because they're kind of futurist or fantastical. And he's kind of merging that with like this like workwear, stuff that like, which gets him kind of lambasted in social media for like, oh, that shit looks like homeless people's coats or whatever, right? So it's merging that and that Star Wars with that, like, and adding like a flair of like the fantastic and the genre to like urban workwear and urban streetwear, right? This is the clothes, not the shoes.
Yeah.
Shoes are its own thing. Works with Adidas for those. Those have gotten progressively more and more biopunk as the years have gone, but that's its own thing. But the clothes, I thought were always very good, and I identified immediately with everything that he was coming from because I'm also like a big cinephile, like movies a lot. So I'm like, I recognize that. I recognize that. When he's talking about Terminator 2 with that, I know in the way he means it and stuff like that, right? But so from that you get into fashion and like you start caring about like really trying to differentiate what makes this coat worth $8,000, $2,000. What makes this brand worth this, worth that, etc.
And what does make a brand worth that or is that or 2,000 versus $8,000 for a
It's a
coat?
good question, right? I mean, so a thing that happened a couple of weeks ago was the Paris Couture collection, actual haute couture. Are you familiar with haute couture?
I am not.
Okay, so there's like regular fashion, right? Then there's like fast fashion, which is like Zara and stuff like that.
Okay.
Cheap stuff that's meant to be pretty disposable. Then there's like usually workwear is like a step ahead of that. Like, we're talking stuff like Carhartt or Brooks Brothers, like obviously 2 different industries,
Yeah.
right? One's for lawyers, one for like construction, but like they're built to a standard and they have a higher level of quality, right? And above that, you have actual like fashion brands, right? And then above that, you start getting into like brands who put on runway shows, right? Where runway fashion, if you're not aware, is differentiated from actual ready to wear, and that you can kind of just show whatever on a runway.
Yeah.
You can be more outrageous or what have you in order to express like a creative idea. And then eventually you'll create like a version of it sold in stores that is actually machine manufacturable, that could be distributable at like a reasonable price, that you can manufacture hundreds or thousands of copies of.
Yeah, I was gonna
Right.
say you never see any. A lot of stuff you see in runway fashion, you never see in public, but you see variations of it.
Right, but that's again not the idea. It's sort of like you know how like people say when you're paying for brand, you're paying for marketing.
Yeah.
Well, the marketing and that you're actually paying for is the concepts that are behind the runway show. Like people are very aware that they're paying for marketing, and they're very happy that their dollars are going towards making these additional seasons of runway expression, because that's what actually you're kind of buying into, right? It's sort of like buying a I don't know, like a video game. Like you're not actually buying the game, you're buying a license to the game. You're just hoping that the developers continue to make more content, support the game, or what have you, release new maps. It's done with the knowledge that really you're not getting your money's worth in terms of materials and labor or what have you, but you are buying into like the aesthetic and the creative ambitions of the brand, right?
Okay.
And then there's couture. Couture or haute couture is just like you have to be like there's a council that tells you whether or not you're allowed to make it, first of all, and call it that. And everything has to be done by hand. The entire premise of couture is that it's one of one and extravagant ones that only literally 4,000 people in the world will ever be able to afford. We're talking about like gowns that cost $500,000, right? That like have like 800 carats of diamonds hand sewed in over by one person over the course of 2 years to make that one dress for you or whatever. And recently, Balenciaga, who's now run by Demna, is starting up a couture business, an actual couture business. It had their first couture show in I think over 50 years. The original founder of Balenciaga, Cristobal Balenciaga, basically at one point retired and said, "We're not doing haute couture anymore." And nobody has ever tried it, although the brand has kind of stuck around. Nobody has tried it since. And Demna was like, "We have a big enough name. I think I've said all I wanted to say in regular ready-to-wear fashion, and I'm going to now do couture." Well, how does normcore and couture clash? Right? How do you take something that is inherently like base on like kind of lampooning or being like very like 3 layers removed ironic, like ironically inspired by like people who dress with no attention to fashion at all, and mix that with a show that's literally designed to market your skills and your abilities to a clientele of like the wives of like oil sheiks or what have you, who want to just put down $500,000 for something incredibly like, hard to make, and that they can show off at red carpet, premieres or like society balls and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so he ended up not really doing something super high end. There was nothing truly like outrageously luxurious about it, and like it kind of stuck to the codes of what he was expressing and ready to wear. Like people pulling up in t-shirts and jeans at a show, and him basically saying, "Yeah, that'll be like $8,000 for that t-shirt because it's like handmade out of a super rare cotton or some shit like that." So like the highest end materials, but still these same sort of ideas. There's like more like there's bigger gowns and like more complicated constructions, but still like these same sort of normcore ideas that he like entered Balenciaga with some reference to like Cristobal Balenciaga's earliest work, and later work in the 50s, and so on. But so how do you assign value to that? Like is it even ethical to like create a product that is quote unquote such a ripoff, right?
Yeah. I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's ethical?
I mean, like, I'm not the customer regardless, right?
Sure.
But like also in the messaging, he's like couture is very important because it's so one of one. Like you're not mass creating these things. You have a lesser impact on the environment because you don't really have inventory and what have you. And he's kind of spinning into like the sustainability shit, which like obviously is like smells of bullshit, right?
Yeah.
But there is this I don't know if it's importance, but like I think like you like with rap, you start eventually gaining access to like all this sort of stuff that's like obviously aspirational, right?
Yeah.
And it being sold to you, it's I guess what is the term for this? It's authenticity. right? Because they just need to be. I think they're trying to sell authenticity versus like trying to sell like sustainability or even like uh reasonability.
Sure.
They're trying to sell some idea of authenticity. It's like how do you want to buy your authenticity,
Yeah.
right?
Makes sense.
Um. So yeah, new Kanye album coming next week. It's gonna be fun.
Right.
A thing that he usually tries to do is he tries to get like a new artist to do his album artwork every every album. And this is the first one he's done with a artist where he's just like licensed a previous piece from an artist
Oh
instead of
wow.
like having one commissioned. Because the artist is dead and died in 2010.
Oh well. Yeah, kind of hard to get something new at that point.
Yeah. But it's just this French artist who the new album is named after his mom, and I think is about like his idea of parents and his relationship to his mom, his relationship to his own kids and stuff like that. Especially in like with the new divorce and everything, right?
Yeah.
So the album's named after his mom. Apparently, his like excerpts from like interviews with his mom appear throughout the album, and the album artwork is done by this French painter whose name I would butcher if I try to pronounce. I think her last name is like Boulois, like Louis Boulois or something like that.
Yeah.
She's pretty famous. She I don't know if you've seen these, but she's famous for these gigantic spider sculptures that are like in a bunch of cities. She made like a whole bunch of them.
Okay. I think I've heard of this. Yeah.
Okay, she's famous for those, but it's not a spider that's on the album art. It's just some random other painting she did of like these kind of ancient fertility goddess looking, woman curve shape, right? And it's like a cropped in picture of just the head of one of these figures that she painted. So I immediately got the reference. I was like, okay, that makes sense. I know who this person is, but it's just fun to like also see Kanye getting people into contemporary and modern art, right?
That makes
Um,
sense. Yeah.
like for instance, his I don't know if you've seen his music video for "Famous,"
Um,
the song off "Life of Pablo." Anyway,
I don't think I've seen the
there's a
music
long
video.
ass music video, and it's completely inspired by this one painting by a contemporary painter, and like he brought the painter out to the premiere, and like was like, this is inspired by your thing, and he produced like a sculpture that's based off of it as well, and he's very connected into like all these kind of mavens of high culture, for whether it be fine arts or architecture, interior design, technology, uh, of course, fashion and all that. So from that, you kind of just start like getting like an education in his taste, and then like you start can build your own taste about like a kind of world that you don't really necessarily have access to otherwise, right? Like I had never had an interest in art history. I had never had an interest um in like fashion or any of this sort of stuff because of how much like this sort of stuff is inherent to listening to Kanye in terms of the lyrics and everything. Um, you just end up learning about it.
Interesting. And would you say there's aspects other than fashion that Kanye kind of introduced you to?
Well, I mean, like that's one example with like the painting, right? Like I already knew about
Yeah.
that painting, but that's because I was into contemporary art because of Kanye's introduction to like Takashi Murakami or George Kondo,
Sure.
right? Like those are two figures that literally would not, be in popular culture if Kanye didn't have them do his album art, right?
Yeah.
Or even like stage design with like as Devlin, like who has graduated from doing like sets for random like British rock bands. After she worked with Kanye, she now works with Beyonce, The Weeknd, and now she's like, I think she like used that and flipped it into doing the stage design for the Oscars. I mean, not the Oscars, the Olympics in 2012 when they happened in London. Like her trajectory to doing the Olympic opening ceremony was through Kanye.
Hmm.
Right. So like
Wow.
now she's doing like design for like the Royal Opera and stuff like that. So
Pretty
like
wide spectrum of things right there.
So through Kanye, you get to learn about like, oh, like, would I ever go to an opera? Do I have an opinion of the set designs of operas? You know, and everything is hypertextual in the sense that if she says a name, there's a 50% chance it's some random like supermodel, and there's a 50% chance that like it's some like Swiss architect. And you just Google the architect and you look at pictures and you go, wow, that's really cool, right? And I really don't know what other avenues kind of expose you to the kind of like the arts as much as rap music does. Because like for instance, another rap artist I listen to is Action Bronson. Have you heard of him?
I have, definitely.
So Action Bronson, like his whole thing is like kind of food references and like
Yeah.
references to like late 20th century sleaze movies or what have you. And you learn a lot about like Googling the kind of movies that he's referencing in his lyrics, or like talking about like eating in specific places. And he's like flipped that into like a television show. And that television show is about him traveling the world, doing shows and like eating at these like Michelin star restaurants or what have you. Like I knew what pizza restaurant to go to in Brooklyn because I watched Action Bronson.
Nice.
And I went there and it was bad.
Yeah. Oh no. So it seems like you're getting into the culture, but the culture is letting you down.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily letting me down, but like like I knew the word.
Yeah.
I knew where to go. I knew what to ask for. And then when I get hooked up with a friend, she was like, "Oh, I want to go take you to my birthday dinner. Where are you having? Oh, the place that you went to that you said was bad."
Oh wow.
So everybody loves it. I just personally like don't care for it.
That
But like the
happens.
premise is that like you feel like more of a local to like the kind of like world that these rappers kind of spin up. And
Makes
if you
sense.
if you tug at all the strings, like you know, you listen to enough Future, you get hyped to like visit Atlanta and go to the King of Diamonds. No, go to Magic City strip club where DJ Esco DJs on Mondays, right? Like you just pick up information from all these like layers of not layers, waves of lyrics and density and imagery that are in these songs, right?
Yeah. Oh, that I felt the same way with some of the artists I've listened to, so I definitely can relate. And if I remember correctly, I think you referenced it briefly, but Action Bronson is in like a Netflix like kind of dining show or something, or like with someone else. But I think he has a show now.
He has, I think, multiple shows. I think he had a long running one with like I think a cable network at some point, and he
Yeah.
has like a YouTube show, and I think he also has like maybe a Netflix thing, if you were saying.
Yeah.
But specifically, like that show is an extension of what's already in his music, is what I'm saying. But it's not just that in his music. Like in that he's like referencing like obscure like 70s movies. He's referencing like New Yorkisms and like the sort of like Queens localities that he's talking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Talking about, you know what I mean? What a phrase. There's so much imagery in I think my favorite artists in terms of not just like what they're talking about, but like the kind of flourishes that kind of lend the world building something that you just can't help but like want to learn more about. One of my great favorite things to do in high school was attempt to read the book Finnegan's Wake. Have you heard of Finnegan's Wake?
I've heard of it. I've not read it.
Yeah, it's basically it's not, I think, a book made to be read cover to cover. It's something made to be gawked at and like intermittently attempted to be understood. And it was just a fun thing to carry around and like kind of memorize passages out of, right? River run past Even Adams, from Service Shore to Bend to Bay, brings us by commodious vicars of recirculation back to Health Castle and Inference. None of that means anything. It's all like stuff in like different languages and puns and jokes about like rhymes and stuff like that. And if you go online and you try to like look up all this stuff, it's like Rap Genius before Rap Genius existed. Every other word is annotated and it attempts to like explain to you what this word means, what language it's from, whether it's referencing another part of the book or something like that. And that kind of like and the sensation as you read it of meaning rushing past your head without you understanding necessarily what it means is something I've always loved. And going back and like looking at all the links and learning about like, oh, when he's talking about the River Run or something like that, he's referencing a specific 16th century Italian philosopher. You look it up, and you're somewhat smarter. I don't know if
Yeah.
smarter is the right word, but you're somewhat more worldly, and like
Yeah.
you have all this more like trivia at your information. I think enriches your world, and it allows you to start thinking in a way that maybe not like the rapper, but it starts like you guys start thinking in a way that allows you to connect dots that I think to most people are pretty disparate because they don't have this kind of constellation to draw from.
That makes sense. I think just music itself just is such a great tool for exposure to so many things. And I think you kind of demonstrated throughout the whole podcast all the different interesting rabbit holes you can get into very quickly.
And it's not necessarily, and that's why I'm saying like I'm not like necessarily a fashion fan or like particularly even a hip hop fan. Like what ends up with happening with hyperlinks, obviously, is that you're not a student.
Yeah.
You're like a tourist to all these different things. You kind of go wide instead of deep, right?
Yeah.
So like a fun thing could happen is I'll start talking about like the new couture collection from Balenciaga, and people think like I'm a fashion student or I'm super into fashion or like I buy like all these expensive brands. I'm like, no, I would never do that. I just can kind of understand what they're doing, right? I have that like surface level ability to like admire like the art, right? And like all these different like mediums. And that's thanks to this sort of like hyper textual like wideness that like kind of is more I guess it's more inviting for you to get into because it's layered on top of some dope production instead of being buried in like an inch thick issue of art form.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of spoon fed to you like how you should enjoy these things and what they're in context with.
Makes sense. I feel like this is like a pretty good place to wrap up unless you had some concluding thoughts. Was there anything else?
I just kind of rambled, man. Do you have any like questions or any sort of
No,
like arcs
I
you wanted to give this?
no, I think that was beautiful. Like I think what I love the most is just allowing free form and kind of seeing how people talk about the things they're passionate about. And while I myself is not a huge Kanye fan, the idea of having an artist and that leading to tangents in my life is like huge. Like I'm a big rock and roll and a hip hop fan, and I've kind of had similar experiences with some of the bands and artists that I've liked. Like I'm a big fan of the rapper from the UK called Low Key, and he has a lot of political music that got me into a lot of specific political like incidences that he references and things like that. So I think this is something that's like really, I think people can definitely relate to, and I definitely appreciated you sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks. And if you're looking for a recommendation for a good hip hop song that's like actually got a message and it's pretty political, I'm particularly partial to this one mixtape track from this artist called Heems. He's a New York City artist.
Okay.
He has a basically remix of the Strokes song "New York City Cop," right?
Okay.
Where the only thing that he preserves are the words "New York City cops, they ain't too smart," looped over and over and over again as part of the instrumental of the track. And he just starts naming all the victims of police brutality by the NYPD for like the last 17 years.
Oh wow!
It's like
I
a
would love to listen to
5-minute
that.
song. It's super, super dense, super, super quotable, funny at parts. And that's like my political track that I'm really into. Like I don't think like content is like totally unnecessary, but like just I guess I'm more of a formalist and I'm more drawn into that.
Yeah,
Not to make the discussion any longer.
no. That's fine. I also too am more of a lyricist when I look for rapping, which is why I was more into sort of very particular artists in modern day and also more into the '90s, like East Coast scene. But like I don't know, a lot of trap music, while it is catchy, I just don't think I can get fully into it when it's when I feel like the lyrics. I guess can't relate or don't feel like there's a lot of depth there.
Listen to the new Playboy Cardi album, bro. You gotta listen to a whole lot of Red.
We'll see.
You want to like listen to somebody attempt to recreate 70s punk without recreating any of the sonic like identifiers or like cadences of actual punk or rock music. Some totally new shit. Listen to that.
Okay, good to know.